Thank you. Executive Director Radu, would you please call the roll?
Regent Bailing. Regent Bradley.
Here.
Regent Drew. Regent Evers.
Here.
Regent Falbo.
Here.
Regent Farrow.
Here.
Regent Higgins. Regent Rybar.
Here.
Regent Landis.
Here.
Regent Menedith.
Here.
Regent Milner.
Here.
Regent Mueller.
Here.
Regent Pruitt.
Here.
Regent Roberts.
Here.
Regent Tyler. Oh, sorry about that. Regent Vasquez.
He's coming. Here.
Regent Walsh. Regent Peterson.
Here.
Regent Whitburn.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. To start things off, I get to do one of my favorite things, welcome a new regent, although we did it our first time yesterday. This is our first official opportunity to introduce our new student regent, Chad Landis. Chad, who hails from Dane, Wisconsin, is a senior at UW-Platteville, majoring in animal science. As one of UW-Platteville's agriculture ambassadors, Chad travels to high schools across the Midwest to recruit students to UWP's School of Agriculture. Not on your snowmobile, though. Maybe sometime. He is also a volunteer snowmobile safety instructor and an active member of the Association of Wisconsin Snowmobile Clubs. After graduation, Chad plans to attend the UW-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine. In appointing Chad, Governor Walker noted that his strong spirit of service and volunteerism makes him a great fit for the Board of Regents. I know I speak on behalf of this board in saying we look forward to working with you, Chad, and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Give you a couple of minutes of rebuttal.
Well, good morning, everybody. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I'm really excited to serve as a student rep to the UW Board of Regents. It's been an interesting past couple of days. I've learned a lot of information, so hopefully I can pick it up and move on forward and use that as the Regents have their meetings in the upcoming months. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. I wanted to also thank all of you for your involvement yesterday and today with the early start this morning, and a lot of work that we did already this morning in capital planning and business finance and audit. So thank you for doing your job so well. With that, I will turn it over to President Riley, who has some introductions also.
Thank you, Regent Falbo, and good morning again. It's my pleasure now to officially welcome to our first Regent meeting UW-Madison Chancellor Becky Blank. She arrived on the scene in July, as I think we all know, and has been busy making the rounds since then. She comes, as we also all know, from the U.S. Department of Commerce, where she served as acting secretary, managing nearly 45,000 employees and a $10 billion budget. During her time at the agency, Becky worked to promote economic development with an emphasis on connecting research and innovation to job creation and economic growth. She previously served as Dean and Professor of Public Policy and Economics in the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan from 1999 to 2008. Before joining the Department of Commerce, she was a fellow at the Brookings Institution, a nonprofit public policy think tank in Washington, D.C. Earlier in her career, she was a member of the faculty at Northwestern University, Princeton University, as well as an assistant visiting professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She also spent 2 years, from 1997 to 1999, as a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Rebecca earned her undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Minnesota and a doctoral degree in economics from MIT. In a true sign that she's being warmly embraced by her new Wisconsin colleagues, we recently learned that Babcock Dairy launched a new ice cream flavor named in the Chancellor's honor, Becky Lime Pie. We look forward to...
Sounds good.
We look forward to giving it a try and to working with her. Welcome, Becky. I also wanted to introduce our new Associate Vice President for Capital Planning and Budget, Alexandria Rowe. Alex is over on that side of the house. Alex succeeds David Miller in this role, bringing 30 years of experience in architecture and 20 years experience in government and higher education. She was most recently Director of Planning at the University of Connecticut, where she has led all physical planning efforts and managed planning, design, and construction of capital projects since 2007. She received her degree in architecture from Virginia Tech. Go Hokies, and you can explain to people what the Hokies are later, Alex. She's received numerous professional awards from higher education, construction, and design organizations, including Woman of Achievement from Professional Women in Construction in 2011. Alex started her new role in mid-August, and she has hit the ground building. So welcome, Alex. Delighted to have you with us. And finally, I wanted to recognize a familiar face in a new role, Steve Wildeck, Vice Chancellor for Administration and Finance for UW Colleges and Extension, has graciously agreed to serve as the Interim Vice President for Finance with the system, taking on the daunting task of following in Debbie Durkin's footsteps. More on Debbie later. Steve's experience includes 13 years as a Chief Business Officer within the UW system. His tenure leading the multiple campuses and units that comprise UW Colleges and UW Extension is great preparation for leadership of UW System's financial affairs. So welcome, Steve, into your role. Where are you? Back to you, President Falbo.
Thank you, Kevin. I wanted to talk a little bit about our session yesterday and thank everybody who participated in yesterday's Finding Common Ground conference. That includes about 200 people who attended and a few key people who worked very hard behind the scenes to put this all together. And I know I mentioned them yesterday, but Regina, Jane, and Jess, I can tell you, when they pulled me in, they were doing so much work. It was just amazing. It's not an easy. It was not an easy thing to pull off. And Heather from David's department did a great job helping us out too. Sometimes when you hit the reboot button, the screen goes dark for a moment, and that can be a little unsettling. Then as the screen slowly comes back to life, you get on with your work, and hopefully that's where we're at. And I think that's a good thing. Charlie Reed gave us some useful tips about building a broad array of partnerships with educational entities, communities, businesses, legislators, and reminding us that we cannot build those relationships sitting in an ivory tower. Legislators told us they're interested in change. We heard suggestions about the need for structural change, some interest in statutory change, and as well as a provocative question about whether this board exists to be a cheerleader or a watchdog. And I think, as I mentioned yesterday, I feel it's both. Every one of them, it seemed, urged us to change the way we communicate, especially when it comes to complex matters of financial transparency, educational performance, and measurable outcomes. In comments from chancellors and legislators alike, we saw the need to balance the need for campus autonomy and flexibility with real accountability and consistent oversight. We convened yesterday's conference by saying that we begin the day like any good Italian gathering with food. In fact, the entire day was about setting the table and inviting everyone to come together. Like many good family gatherings, there were uncomfortable moments and occasional disagreements. And in my family gatherings, those are not occasional. The act of coming together, though, has intrinsic value. None of us were expecting a single gathering to produce immediate consensus. We set the table, shared ideas, and occasionally, again, disagreed. In this process, we gained a clearer understanding of common concerns as well as differences. The question before us is how we use the better understanding and move forward and change. How we go about our work as a public university system and a governing body will change, and it will almost certainly involve more difficult conversations. But the overarching goal remains the same: to strengthen all UW institutions, enhance their service to Wisconsin students, families, businesses, and communities. We won't, as I know, I have confidence, we won't lose sight of that goal. And again, thank everybody for what I hope and think was a very productive day. As I mentioned previously, it's a high priority of this board to establish strong and open lines of communications with constituents around the state. To that end, Vice President Milner and I have been logging a few miles visiting all of our chancellors except Chancellor Sorensen, but we're not forgetting Chancellor Sorensen. We will visit with him because it certainly respect his input. We are simulating some common ground themes for those visits with the help of Tom Harden, who's going to put some of that together for Regina and I, and then to pass on here to the board. We'll incorporate them into main topics in our planning process. So thank you, Chancellors, for taking the time to visit with us and help us along. And I want to thank Kevin for encouraging us to do that process and to get their direct input. Now we will have a report from President Riley.
Thank you, President Falbo. And while we're passing out thanks, let me thank Regent President Falbo and Regent Vice President Milner for really a lot of very hard work to put the session together yesterday. And it was not simple. It was a tricky group to get together. I think it was something we needed to do, and I want to note that if it weren't for their strong interest and hours of work both on the sort of logistics and the personal side of this, it would not have happened, and it would not have happened in the way it did. So thank you to both of you, and the person sitting between the two of them hasn't slept for the last 2 weeks because she's been working so hard on getting that day together yesterday. So thank all three of you. Thank you very much. On August 22nd, President Obama gave a major speech at the University of Buffalo on his plans to make college more affordable for middle-class American families. In one part of that speech, he gave the UW system a nice shout-out for our work on the UW flexible option. We were pleased to hear the President of the United States acknowledge our innovative efforts to make college more accessible for working adults who want to complete their degrees while meeting work and family obligations. With quality assured by UW faculty, these programs will serve our citizens well, I believe, and strengthen our workforce. The part of his address, though, that garnered a lot more attention, as you've all seen in the media, was the idea of tying federal financial aid programs to institutional performance measures. This is really an unusual approach to so-called performance-based funding. At the state level, performance funding is rarely, if at all, connected to financial aid, but rather it is almost exclusively for operating appropriations. Linking funds to students via financial aid in this way could put on the table some serious new issues. For example, the most widely used data on graduation rates, one of the President's proposed performance indicators, include only first-time, full-time students who graduate within 6 years at the institution where they first enrolled. Reaction to the President's proposal has been mixed, I think it's fair to say. The American Council on Education warned that tying federal financial aid to certain metrics could have a profoundly negative effect on the very students and families the administration is trying to help if it's done in the wrong way. Georgetown University's Tony Carnival, who, as many of you will remember, spoke to this board not that long ago on workforce needs and the skills gap, has cautioned against using post-collegiate earnings and other of the President's proposed metrics as a way to compare one college to the next. Here's what Dr. Carnival said, quote, "Earnings data at the institution-wide level are flawed, favoring more elite institutions which send fewer graduates into lower-paying fields, such as teaching," unquote. Earnings data is also greatly influenced by an institution's program array and could result in institutions moving away from offering degrees in important but lower-paying fields like counseling or child development, for instance. A second point of interest is that earnings data is only measuring earnings in the first few years of college, the way it's typically structured. So the long-term earnings trajectory for various fields differs, and thus earnings data that's measured in the first couple years only is problematic because it does not really tell us much about the individual's lifetime earning potential. I'll cite a new study on that issue in a moment. On the plus side, the President's plan could raise awareness of current income-based repayment options for federal loan programs. That is, those options are out there, but they have been very little used. And his plan could make more students eligible to participate in those programs. At present, I'd say it really doesn't appear that there is adequate evidence as to whether or not income-based or contingent repayment by students is one of the best ways to either mitigate the impact of student loan repayment or allow students to pursue careers in fields or occupations such as public service that may be lower paying. To date, I think the harder evidence only points to the fact that expansion of income-related repayment would reduce default rates and might reduce the federal government's collection costs of defaulted loans. The maintenance of effort provision is another positive component which requires continuing present funding levels by state governments, similar to provisions included in the 2009 economic stimulus legislation. In this regard, the President's plan recognizes that one of the main drivers of increasing tuition is states' overall disinvestment in higher education over the last decades. Additionally, the proposed federal plan would offer incentives to states and colleges that experiment with innovative cost containment strategies. So the UW system's flexible option could benefit from these incentives. While we wait for more details to emerge, that's some of our initial analysis, and I want to emphasize that the President has not yet put out anything like a full plan. It was more of a sort of 30,000-foot framework that he talked about in these speeches. So we're watching for that closely. We are hoping to participate in some in the back and forth about it, working with national associations. Our Assistant Vice President for Federal Relations is here, Chris Andrews, who's worked on this, and if any members of the board have questions at this point about it, we'll be happy to try to respond. All just sort of a framework for a plan at this point, pretty preliminary, but one that could have profound effects if all or part of it actually became law. And some of it would have to become law. That is, the Congress would have to actually approve some parts of it. Chris, anything you want to add at this point? Okay. All right. Now, about that study I mentioned earlier, according to a recent report by career site The Ladders, the real benefits of college show over the course of a career, and they are massive. As described in a Business Insider article, the study found, quote, the early payoff of having a degree is tiny, even non-existent. Many students will find themselves earning the same amount as people without a degree, but that situation does not last. Calling it the job versus career trajectory, the researchers found that individuals without a degree move more slowly toward their highest earning potential. Individuals with a college degree may start in the same compensation range, but grow exponentially over the course of their careers. More specifically, the study found that 10 years after graduation, people with at least a 4-year degree see their compensation rise by about $3,778 a year versus $369 for non-graduates. The gap is even more massive after 20 years. Graduates earn $25,000 more than those without a 4-year diploma. So, even with student loan debt, the data indicate that college is a solid long-term investment, but you have to look long-term to see that advantage. In other news, I'm pleased to tell you that Heather Kim, our Associate Vice President for Policy Analysis and Research, has been elected to the National Student Clearinghouse Board. Among other things, the National Student Clearinghouse's access to nationwide data on post-secondary enrollment and degree records makes it possible now for higher education institutions to track transfers on to graduation and to collect, therefore, much more accurate and complete graduation and retention data. Again, one of the things we worry about with the President's plan is this notion that if we use the old so-called IPEDS data and it counts only first-time, full-time freshmen who graduate from the institution where they started 6 years later, it's a very distorted picture of students who do succeed by graduating from somewhere. So with the clearinghouse's better data, we don't have to count then a student who starts at one institution and graduates from another as a failure or a dropout. This is a huge improvement, I think, in getting the real picture of our strengths and weaknesses and how to intervene more often successfully with our students. So congratulations, Heather. We look forward to your work on that board. And I thought I'd conclude today, President Falbo, with a part of a poem by Seamus Heaney, who died last week. Many of you may have seen that, Irish Nobel Prize-winning poet. He has a collection of his poems, a selected collection of poems, which is appropriate to follow on our discussion of common ground because it's called opened ground. These are poems of his between 1966 and 1996. There's a long one that is written in memory of his mother. I'll read just two stanzas from it, and it's about his thinking back to her death and thinking back to his childhood connections with her over the act, very appropriate for an Irish poet, of peeling potatoes. So it goes like this. When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one like solder weeping off the soldering iron. Cold comforts sat between us, things to share gleaming in a bucket of clean water. And again let fall. Little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So while the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some crying, I remembered her head bent toward my head, her breath in mine, our fluent, dipping knives, never closer the whole rest of our lives.
Very good.
Turn it back to you, Regent Fellow.
Very good. I, of course, have much different memories about peeling potatoes. It has to do with the United States Army. I'd like to now call upon the distinguished Regent Higgins to present a report on the actions taken by the Ready Committee during its recent meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Falbo. I am here in place of the distinguished Regent Higgins. I do want to apologize up front to my fellow regents. This report will be a smidge longer than usual because I want to bring you up to date on some changes that have happened since our last committee meeting, which I'll be reporting on. I do want to thank Dave Bruckhardt and Dave Miller and Mark Nook and Cody Lowell, who have really put in a lot of extra time and effort on our process of planning for the requesting applications for, judging, and then selecting winners of our economic incentive grant process. Earlier today, the Business and Finance Committee item 1.2.B included a $22.5 million appropriation over the next biennium for economic incentive grants. It's our timeline that on the 10th of this month we have to submit to the Joint Finance Committee and Department of Administration a process for requesting and awarding those grants, and so that's what we've been working very busily on recently. The economic incentive grants themselves we're going to ask our campuses to submit requests for funding economic development programs, development of an educated and skilled workforce, and programs for improving affordability of post-secondary education. I want to emphasize the fact that we are not limiting campuses to one proposal or request per campus. So we expect that we'll receive somewhere between 30 and 45 total applications for these economic incentive grants. I also want to point out that in discussions, the chancellors have very wisely, I believe, decided that this should not be Dave Miller put it this way, a peanut butter spreading process, in that we're going to make these proposals fit the amount offered and across the system. So that means that we will be funding proposals completely, and there will be probably winners and losers in this competitive process. And I'm really very happy that the chancellors have agreed that that's probably that is the best way for us to move forward. So our committee meeting that was held by teleconference on August 26th dealt mostly with this process. I opened the meeting by welcoming the regents who are on the Ready Committee, and that is everyone who is an appointed member of the Ready Committee except Regent Drew, who was tied up with work and could not join us. We also had on the teleconference Senior Vice President Mark Nook, Senior Vice President David Miller, and Associate Vice President David Brookhart. We asked Senior Vice President Miller to begin the discussion by giving us a brief overview of the history, intent, and current status of the incentive grant program, just to make sure we had the background in our minds. The committee then began discussion of the program and focused on the programs and activities that are eligible to receive funding, the incentive grant acknowledging as required by the legislation that created these grants that incentive grant program funds are not base building, that the application and evaluation criteria, and the selection committee appointment and composition. There will be no compensation. And I want to invite you to look at the materials that were handed out. There's an incentive program update sheet that I'll be referring to. Since the committee meeting, we've had 3 modifications of the plan that was in front of the committee at the time we passed the resolution. The first is the removal of WISES from eligible grant recipients, and that is simply a statutory matter. The legislature did not include WISES in the program. Second is modifications of the incentive grant committee composition. So we wanted a committee of about the same size as originally contemplated, but with input from within and without the system, we decided to include selectors in different proportions, so that we are going to have a committee that is made up of 15 individuals, 7 of whom will be from within the system, generally provosts and chief business officers. We will have a member of the UW system staff, that, thank heavens, will be Vice President Chris Andrews, who will be representing system there. And then we will have representatives from outside of the system. I'm very, very pleased to let you know that we are initiating a sustainability program and recycling old Regents. Because we've asked and have been accepted, thank you, heavens, by former Regent Jeff Bartels, who will be the non-voting chair of the committee. And Regent Emeritus Bartels' job will essentially be to make sure that this very truncated process moves along with the speed that it needs to move along. So when I asked him to do that, he was very gracious in accepting, and we're pleased to have him on board to kind of punch on this process. We will have representatives from outside the system, including Reed Hall, Secretary and CEO of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, Tom Still, who's the Director of the Wisconsin Technology Council, former Regent, another of our individuals in our recycling program, Mark Tyler, and venture capitalist from the Appleton area, Charlie Goff. Joining them will be 2 nominees that we've requested from the leadership of the Senate and the Assembly. We haven't got those names yet, but we will have them by the 10th of this month. And we're in the process of getting responses from 2 other representatives from economic development organizations in the state of Wisconsin that I can't give to you yet because I haven't got final confirmation. So those are the modifications to the selection committee. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up was we've had to modify the timetable for completion of the grant slightly. We had originally thought we would complete the process by November 1st, and we moved that up to October 31st because the original process didn't contemplate approval of the recommendations of the Incentive Grant Selection Committee by the Ready Committee. So we've included that, and I'm going to ask our Ready Committee members to be ready for another teleconference on the 1st of November to look at the recommendations that the selection committee has offered to us and approve those for final approval by the Board of Regents. Now, one of the things that we needed to get done, or that we had to take into account, is the fact that we're already late in the biennium in offering these grants. So once they're distributed, people can finally get started. The problem we face is if we go past the beginning of November, we will end up in that kind of a sync time that is finals for the first semester, holiday period, and the beginning of the second semester, which means that unless we award these grants sometime in early November, we probably won't have anybody getting to work on any of the stuff until February. And so we're probably going to ask the Board of Regents at our October meeting to allow the executive committee to meet, again by teleconference, if that's how you'd like to do it, to approve the recommendations of the Ready Committee, approving the selections of the committee for the incentive grant proposals. So that's the process that we're going to move forward with. In our meeting on the 26th, we did pass the resolution that we're asking you to approve today, and that resolution is that upon recommendation of the President of the University of Wisconsin System, the UW System Board of Regents approves and recommends submission of the incentive grant program request for proposals plan to the Secretary of the Department of Administration and the Joint Committee of Finance for 14-day passive review as required and defined by Section 36.25 sub 52 of state statutes. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what I move and would ask the Board of Regents to consider approving.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. I want to thank you guys. I know this is a very intense and condensed process, so you've been doing a lot of work. I want to thank your committee for that. Yes, Margaret.
I guess the discussion was really good on the teleconference committee meeting too that the chairman, chairman of the committee, Regent Higgins, conducted. My concern, remind me, the timeline of this was in this state budget, or does this go back to another statutory time requirement?
It's this budget.
It's this budget, right?
Yes.
So they passed it on June 30th, and signed the law on June 30th. Timely, I should recognize that, on time. But here's my concern, and I think timeline is reasonable, though quick. If the schools identify and begin this program, and one of their partners is a private sector entity that is going to get involved with them in some way, providing, say, a piece of equipment that's going to create this new economic development, but they're going to start it at the university. Is there any way we can ask the Department of Administration to move as hastily in giving them their approvals for that? Because it's come to my attention that any of that type of thing has to go through DOA. And we would appreciate it if this is the timeline we're working hard with all of our institutions to meet their timeline. Will they help us by being a little more timely than they often are on their end? And I don't know if that's worth communicating, but I think it's important.
Regent Farrell, I had a meeting with the Secretary Thursday, and we talked about this process and the importance of what you just said. So it's on his radar. He understands the process we're using, and then the need for their response in a timely way. And I think they'll be very, very cooperative.
I think
very helpful.
I think that's terrific to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Papa, just a
Yes.
couple of editorial comments. The first, coming out of our discussions yesterday on Common Ground, one thing that I'd like to recognize Chairman Higgins for is that we've got legislative representation on this on the front end, which I think is incrementally valuable. And the other is that we've added back the review of Ready, which really plays to the role of being the watchdog. Previously, we had overlooked that. I think that was a great catch on the part of system staff. and the chairman, and because of that, I think we'll be better prepared to recommend these on this adjunct timeline that we've got.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. That concludes your report? Thank you. We are going to call on Regent Whitburn, but I'm going to go from a solid line through Kevin and then a dotted line over to Gary to do that. And he's going to talk about the Business and Finance Committee and the Audit Committee.
It's a thrill, President. Dotted line goes through. Thank you, Chancellor Calvo. The two committees, as you know, met this morning in a joint session to consider really a broad agenda. We received an update on gifts, grants, and contracts for the past year. Bottom line is federal awards are down about $84 million. Non-federal awards have increased $32 million. We considered for the Madison campus an improved resolutions related to three contractual relationships. We approved contractual agreements with the University of Alabama, ESPN, and the Cowboy Stadium, under which the Badgers will play the Crimson Tide in a season opening game on September 5th, 2015. We also approved an agreement between UW-Madison and Elcon research related to the testing of intraocular lens, and also a master service agreement with iCor LLC for future clinical studies of new drugs. The legislature in the recently enacted budget legislation required the UW system to submit a plan to the Joint Finance Committee documenting how we will fund certain grants and other initiatives included in the budget, including the incentive grants we were just talking about. The committee approved the plan proposed by the President. The legislature in the recently signed budget delayed, as you know, for 2 years the implementation of the new personnel systems for the university authorized in the previous budget. Among the implications is that the classified staff will remain under the auspices of the Office of State Employment Relations for the next 2 years. Nonetheless, we've gone forward and approved a policy that will permit classified staff on each of the campuses to structure themselves and to select representatives so as to participate in institutional governance with faculty and administrative staff. The committee, upon the recommendation of the President and senior staff, recommended a modification to the so-called account balance methodologies document that the board approved in July and that's now pending in front of the Joint Audit Committee. Under the resubmission, the federal indirect funds will be treated separately from other categories of restricted and unrestricted year-end balances. The committee then received an update from Senior Vice President Miller on the progress that's been made in the development of the program revenue year-end carry-forward policy that must be submitted to the Joint Finance Committee for their review no later than January 1st. In this segment of the agenda, we had a very robust conversation, and I think the bottom line is that the full board will see a recommended policy later this fall for final approval. The combined committee then considered two resolutions related to the newly established audit committee and the reporting of the chief audit executive. In separate resolutions which were modified, an audit committee charter was approved, and it was resolved that the chief audit executive will report to the board through the audit committee and to the system president. The system president and the chair of the audit committee will have joint responsibility for the hiring, performance evaluation, and compensation of the chief audit executive. The committee also received an update on current and planned audit activities. Finally, the Joint Committee received a report from Chris Lydon and Peggy Hardick of Price Waterhouse on the risk assessment that they've been doing in connection with our HRS implementation in ongoing operations. The consultant shared with the committees a series of risk-related recommendations, some more serious than others, associated with the governance structure of the service center, the evaluation and evolution of internal controls, the adequacy of training, suggested tightening with user access, and also the matter of the complexity of our benefit plan structures. We received a report from staff concerning steps that are being taken to address these ongoing risk exposures. Among other things, the reporting structure for the Service Center director and staff is being reviewed, and we'll receive another update on that subject and potential action by this board in our October meeting. I would move approval of resolutions 12A3, A4, A5, 12B, C, and D, and modified resolutions 15F2 and 15F3.
Is there a second? Any discussion? I think with all the good work you did this morning, everybody's on board. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Good your report? Thank you. The report of the actions taken by the Capital Planning and Budget Committee. I'd like to call on Regent Menedez.
Thank you. Capital Planning and Budget Committee met this morning. We considered 4 resolutions. It was clear that everyone that was present had read the materials. We also had questions which were fully answered by the presenters and the staff, and we unanimously voted to approve those resolutions. Those are 1.3B, requesting authority to construct a $15 million University of Wisconsin housing renovation to undertake selective renovations in 30 buildings. Resolution 1.3C, requesting authority to construct the $7.9 million McAlmont Hall renovation project at UW Stout. Resolution 1.3D, requesting authority to construct the $2.1 million Raymer Field renovation phase 1 press box replacement project at UW River Falls. And Resolution 1.3E, requesting authority to construct 3 all-agency maintenance and repair projects with an estimated cost of $4.5 million. These requests included multi-energy conservation projects and utility upgrades. I would ask that the full board, on my motion, approve these resolutions also.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
That concludes my report.
Very good. Very efficient. We are now going to entertain a resolution of appreciation for Vice President Deborah Durkin's service to the UW system. Where is Deborah?
Let me start. I think I'll do it from here and then come up, and Mark will present the Regent resolution. We do this time want to recognize a departing colleague, although knowing Debbie's personality, it's hard to think of her as departing in any way, our Vice President for Finance. As you know, Debbie recently announced her retirement after 37 years of service to the UW system. Over the years, Debbie has made a difference to the UW system in so many ways, both big and small. You'll hear about some of those in the Regent resolution. We don't have time, to recognize all of them, but I do want to share a few of my thoughts. Through thick and thin, Debbie was always a person who could be counted on to provide really valuable counsel to me and to cabinet colleagues regarding the financial impact of programmatic decisions on institutional and UW system business operations and our financial status overall. At Debbie's retirement event recently, my predecessor, former UW system Catherine Lyle, called attention to Debbie's long-term but perhaps not widely known role on the board of Wisconsin's College Savings Program, EdVest, which has helped families all across the state to afford to send children to college. And you might say that many of Debbie's accomplishments have so far or have often gone unsung, so to speak, which leads to another reason we will really miss her. Her professionalism and expertise with regard to financial matters can only be matched by her encyclopedic knowledge of popular song lyrics. Anyone who has carpooled with Debbie over the years knows she will keep you singing the entire trip, no matter how long that road trip might be. So you'd better have practiced your harmony if you're going on a road trip with her. Debbie herself has also been known to pen a rhyming couplet or two of her own, especially to commemorate the careers of departing colleagues. These many talents of hers make her not only a modern-day Renaissance woman, but also a cherished colleague. In short, we will miss many things about Debbie, not the least of which will be her contagious laugh, her bright smile, her warm friendship. And I would say with Debbie, it was always, always, always about the university, its students, its faculty, and its staff. It was never about her. And so now, Debbie, I hope you have a long and happy retirement that is about you to a greater extent than you've had working here as hard as you did. So I'll leave you with what George Washington said to Thomas Jefferson when Jefferson was resigning as Secretary of State at the beginning of Washington's second term in 1793. Washington said this: "Let a conviction of my most earnest prayers for your happiness accompany you in retirement." So, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, President Riley and President Falbo. You know, there's a saying that you always remember your first. Now, Debbie Durkin knows what I mean by that, and so does her husband, Eli, know what I mean by that. Debbie Durkin was the first member of the UW system staff that I got to know well as a regent. It was only a month or two after I was appointed to the board when we elected a new president, Toby Markovich, who's the second from the right over there in that rogues gallery. And in Toby's inimical fashion, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Mark, I have to fill a vacancy on that Business and Finance Committee, so why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, Toby, I don't know if that's such a good idea. I've never even been to one of their meetings." And he said, "Well, that's all right. So you got Debbie Durkin staffing that committee." He said, "You don't have anything to worry about." And as it turned out, I didn't have anything to worry about. And I want to publicly thank Debbie for shepherding me through the process and providing just tremendous staff work to the Business and Finance Committee when I chaired it. So Debbie and I got to know each other real well and real fast. I benefited, and all of the members of the Board of Regents benefited from Debbie's thoroughness, her good judgment, as Kevin mentioned, and her outstanding commitment to providing for our students, assisting our campuses and extension, and just generally helping the Board of Regents carry out its mission. And we also benefited from the depth and breadth of Debbie's experience and also her expertise, both on a state level and a national level, which I think you'll more fully appreciate as I read this resolution of appreciation. Whereas Deborah A. Durkin has honorably served the University of Wisconsin system and all 6 UW system presidents since merger with great dedication and distinction for 37 years, including the past 14 years as Vice President for Finance. And whereas her position as the university's Chief Financial Officer is the culmination of a productive and distinguished career, greater than the sum of its parts, in which she has risen through the ranks, starting as an accountant after earning her degree from UW-Madison, and subsequently being promoted to Assistant Director for Financial Reporting, Director of Accounting Services, Controller, Associate Vice President for Financial Administration, Assistant Vice President, and finally, in 1999, Vice President for Finance. And whereas she has led a broad array of business and finance operations, including financial information, financial reporting, travel management, internal audit, procurement, risk management, and trust funds, with a combined staff of over 60 individuals, and has convened monthly meetings of the institutional chief business officers, engaging the collective wisdom and insights of the group to identify best practices and address challenges. And whereas she has coordinated the activities of the Board of Regents Business and Finance Committee, working closely with the committee members, system administration, and institutional representatives to ensure effective and efficient meetings, and has contributed to more standardized, streamlined operations through co-chairing the UW System Common Systems Review Group and implementing the UW System's shared financial system. And whereas Debbie has been an active member of several professional associations, serving on the board of directors of the Central Association of College and University Business Officers, chairing the 2004 annual meeting of its national counterpart, NACUBO, and currently serving on the NACUBO Research University's Constituent Council, while also serving on the State of Wisconsin's College Savings Board. And whereas Debbie helped create WISIS, coordinating efforts to bring Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation expertise to UW comprehensive institutions, and has sponsored many significant efficiency and security efforts across UW institutions, including enterprise risk management assessments, lean manufacturing principles training, and the creation of continuity of operations and pandemic plans. And whereas Debbie's broad mastery of complex financial rules, together with her hallmark eloquence, calmness, good cheer, and collegiality, have led her to provide invaluable counsel to the President and Cabinet members, helping the UW system develop sound financial policies and practices, ensure fiscal integrity, and achieve academic missions in the spirit of the Wisconsin idea. Be it therefore resolved that the University of Wisconsin System Board of Regents highly commends and thanks Deborah A. Durkin for her years of service spanning 4 decades and her incalculable contributions to higher education in Wisconsin, and extends its sincere best wishes in her retirement and all her future endeavors. Michael J. Falvo, President of the University of Wisconsin System Board of Regents. Debbie, could you join me?
Print on this resolution how to get so small because she's done so many things.
Early reading. Now you start singing and we'll see if we know the lyrics.
It was tempting to do this by song, since that's how I usually like to do it, or by poetry, but I decided that I should make it more formal. So it's hard to believe I'm standing here exactly 37 years to the day when I started as an entry-level accountant within the UW System Office of Financial Reporting. Sorry. It's been an incredible journey with many highlights too numerous to mention. But I would like to share with you some of the advice I received along the way and some of the lessons I learned. After all, this is an institution that's focused on learning. As most people who have stood here before me, my early advice came from my parents. From the time I was very young, my dad would always say, laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. So when I looked up that phrase, I learned that he was wrong, and it was supposed to be weep and you weep alone. But it was written by a poet by the name of Ella Wheeler Wilcox, and she's from Wisconsin. And I took the words to heart, and those who know me know that I can find humor in just about anything. I also got strong advice from my mother, who frequently informed me to get a good education so you can get a good job and you can tell the men to go to hell. So as Meatloaf would sing, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Graduating from UW-Madison, I received a great education, and I did pretty well at getting a good job. But sadly, my mother passed away before I could show her my favorite photo of President Lyle's cabinet in 2002, when Senior Vice President Dave Oline was missing that day. And if you look carefully, there is not a man in sight. I learned very on in my UW career about humility and about how to treat people. Back in the day, there were many social events, and fairly soon after I started, there was an organized bowling outing. I worked in the Peterson building, which is now the new phase of the Chazen, and we worked closely with a lot of UW-Madison people. There were also system offices here in Van Nuys, over on Monroe Street, and in the Wharf building. So we all got assigned to bowling teams, and we were introducing each other. And one of the women, she worked down in the registrar's office, and we went on to play volleyball together for years. And there was a man who introduced himself as Ruben Lorenz. And we did the where do you work exchange, and he said, I work in Van Nuys, and I said, I work in the Peterson building. And then he said, well, what office are you in? And he said, business and finance. I said, financial reporting. Then came the, what do you do there? I proudly said, I'm an accountant. And he said, I'm the vice president. His nonchalant manner left a lasting impression on me. I learned it doesn't matter where you work or what you do or what your title is, we all play a role in the success of the UW system. Ruben also taught me about the importance of professional development and the joy of giving back to your profession in what he would call the icing on the cake. He had been very active in both the regional and national associations of college and university business officers, and I followed his lead. I have attended a multitude of professional development activities over the years, as well as regularly attending the annual meetings of both associations. In addition, I served on numerous committees and task forces of both, as well as many years on the board of the regional association. I was asked several times to ascend to the presidency, but the timing was never quite right, as it would have required a lot more travel. And thus, I learned balance. Balance is a difficult state to achieve, especially as a professional woman with children. You feel guilty for not being the perfect mom, and at the same time, guilty for leaving work a little earlier than you might like so as to avoid that late child care penalty or to see that soccer game. There are a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda moments. When a headhunter calls with a great job in some faraway location for a lot more money, it's hard to remember that as a two-career family with kids, it's not that simple to up and relocate. And for us, the balance was to stay in Madison. And so I learned patience and persistence. I've found that in higher education there are two common ways to move up the ladder. One is a fast way that typically involves relocating and changing universities every 3 to 5 to 7 years. And that always sounds exciting because you've got new people, new challenges, new environments, etc. But it's disruptive. The other way is slower, more methodical, and you don't always get the job you're aiming for when you want it or when you think you deserve it. But through patience and persistence, and sometimes a bit of luck, you may just find yourself where you want to be. I also learned patience and persistence in my work. For example, consider management flexibilities. As one of the most heavily regulated systems of higher education in the country, this is something we've been fighting for a very long time. Often, though, there isn't a full appreciation of from where we have come. When I started, and for some time afterwards, institutions would actually pack up their payment vouchers and transport them to Madison, where system staff would check over the work and then do a pre-audit, sign off on them, and before we would cut the checks. We didn't have travel cards or purchasing cards. We had strict position control. If a university collected more money for residence halls due to increased enrollment, we couldn't spend the extra money because we had to have joint finance approval. So I recognize it's often frustrating, especially to new chancellors, because they can't do something here that they always did at their previous institutions. But we've made great progress, and it's a lot better than it used to be. So please, keep up the good fight. Speaking of chancellors, I learned a lot about the uniqueness of our UW institutions. Campus visits were an important way in which I was able to come to appreciate the challenges and opportunities they each faced. And with the number of campuses we have, there was plenty of opportunity to work with so many different people with many different perspectives. Arriving at consensus hasn't always been easy, and as former Regent President Weinstein, who's right over there, said, "It's often like moving a battleship with your bare hands." And this brings me to leadership. I learned a lot about strong, solid leadership during what I like to refer to as the breakaway budget. The leadership demonstrated by then Regent President Pruitt and President Riley during that time was exceptional. They solidified the board and the rest of the chancellors around a common purpose and kept focused. It was a stressful and painful, yet in the end, a uniting time. I could go on and on with more lessons learned, but let me close by saying I couldn't have had the wonderful career I had without the support of my husband, Eli. I thank him. My family, especially my 3 children, and my friends for being that constant reminder that there was more to life than work. I am grateful to President Lyle for appointing me to this position almost 14 years ago, and to President Riley for keeping me throughout his tenure. I've had the pleasure of working with so many smart, talented, hardworking, and devoted people. I've loved the mental challenge and the variety of the work and the people, all working toward such an important public purpose. Thanks to the chancellors, the provosts, and what I think are the rocks of the institutions, the chief business officers, and a special thanks to my colleagues within system administration, on the cabinet, and especially those past and present with whom I have worked most closely, those who are part of my finance team. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
I'd like to take the opportunity to add a couple of comments. The first 18 months I was on the Board of Regents, I sat right over there with Debbie on one side of me and Pat Brady on the other side of me because I couldn't get to the table. It's where I learned what really went on when they weren't practicing their singing. There was a trio. Wasn't there a third person?
Well, Al has participated. Frida, yes, Frida's office.
So to you and Eli, following the music theme, happy trails. Next on our agenda is a status report from the board committees on their goals. Just as a refresher, committees have been working to identify priority areas that help support our overarching goals. Those goals include, for example, ensuring that the board's work aligns with the strategic goals of the systems, universities, colleges, and extensions. We're also looking at structuring the administration of the system to most effectively support and strengthen the UW institutions, thereby strengthening the UW service to students, families, and other stakeholders. And we plan to further develop the board's and systems role in advocating for system institutions, emphasizing two-way effective communications with campuses, legislators, the governor, and the citizens of the state. Sounds a little bit like our conversation yesterday. I'll ask each chair to report on the committee's progress to date in identifying priorities, starting with Regent Bradley.
Thank you, President Falbo. I'd like to begin my comments just by thanking everyone who has contributed ideas and suggestions in response to various drafts of the initial document that you disseminated at the June board meeting. That draft was shared with chancellors and provosts, as well as selected UW system staff. And at the July board meeting, the Education Committee discussed a revised draft of the initial document and received feedback from provosts and committee members. I invited audience members to provide additional comments to me and to Jane's office and also to Senior Vice President Mark Nook. Another revised draft emerged later in July based on the suggestions that we received in response to my invitation. And then more recently, Senior Vice President Nook conveyed to me additional comments and suggestions that he received from provosts and from chancellors and staff members. So as committee chair, I've considered the feedback that was given to us, and even though our goals and priorities aren't in final form, as an update, I'd like to highlight a few of the tasks ahead for us that seem particularly important to me. So I start with the question of how can the Education Committee exercise guardianship over high-quality education within the system during the next academic year and beyond that. First, I think that the Education Committee can provide support for the examination of important policy issues, including the UW admissions review of our admissions policy, review of remedial education and associate degree standards and policies, the 30-credit general education transfer legislation. And as part of that work, I think the committee will continue to exercise leadership on equity and inclusion, including the integration of underserved students, diverse students, by reviewing the effectiveness of our Inclusive Excellence program and other UW initiatives. Second, I think that the Education Committee can provide leadership on the complex issue of faculty work. And by faculty work, I mean everything that we ask a faculty member to do as part of his or her job. We need to recognize that the job description and our expectations is more than just counting the number of hours that a person is in the classroom. In that regard, I think it would be very helpful if we were to invite somebody with recognized expertise in this area, somebody like Michael Mitta, who wrote the book Understanding Faculty Productivity. And my suggestion is that someone with his expertise be invited to speak to us about standards and benchmarks for measuring the impact of faculty work, which of course includes teaching loads, but is not confined only to teaching loads. And third, as part of our leadership role, I think the Education Committee can help generate ideas about recruiting and retaining quality faculty, creating sufficient support for research activities, both at a modern-day doctoral institution, but also at a modern-day comprehensive institution. And we can assist in talking about the involvement of faculty in technology transfer and economic development, and how we can address what I would call the fair compensation crisis. And our goal, obviously, is to produce high-quality graduates for the state of Wisconsin. And I think it's pretty uniformly held that the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you hire and retain and help develop high-quality faculty and instructional academic staff. And finally, I think that our committee can work with and assist the other committees of the board in their analysis, for example, of costs and revenues, particularly as they relate to academics and student success. It may be helpful, for example, to develop frameworks for assessing the impact of budget reductions on educational quality and access for all of our students, especially those student populations that are currently underserved. So those are some of my ideas as committee chair. They don't necessarily reflect the ideas of the committee because we haven't discussed them fully yet, but we will. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mark. A lot of work. Any questions of Mark or comments? Okay, we will move on to the Research, Economic Development, and Innovation Committee goals, which they've kind of had a little bit of a head start because they were formed not too long ago and under the original chair, Mark Bradley, and now Regent Higgins. So they're maybe a little ahead of the curve.
Well, and I do have to acknowledge Regent Bradley's leadership in putting us in a position where we are ahead of the curve. So Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Privileged to follow you in this position. The Ready Committee's mission, which echoes one of the elements of the UW System's growth agenda for Wisconsin, is to work with WEDC and WISES to leverage the talent, knowledge, and enthusiasm of faculty, staff, and students of UW's 2- and 4-year comprehensive campuses in conjunction with local businesses and economic development organizations to create jobs in Wisconsin. Let me highlight some of the underlying principles of this mission. We started with the understanding that there is already a great deal of research, economic development activity, and innovation going on within the system, and we do not want Ready Committee actions to constrain the creativity and experimentation of individual campuses. We further believe that our doctoral institutions at Madison and Milwaukee, while not perfect, have established infrastructure for technology transfer, business partnerships, and nurturing startup firms that can serve as models for other campuses, thus the express focus initially on colleges and comprehensive campuses in the Ready Committee mission statement. There are many definitions of economic development, but they all come down to increasing the number of jobs in a given area. The Ready Committee and WEDC are focused on increasing the number of jobs in Wisconsin. And the most logical method for the UW to do so is to create new jobs by transferring the technology derived from research and innovation on our campuses to found or expand businesses in the communities those campuses serve. The mission statement makes job creation the ultimate goal. However, Ready Committee members are well aware that leveraging the talent, knowledge, and enthusiasm on our campuses cannot be effectively accomplished without the expansion of research and internship opportunities for undergraduates. The fact that these high-impact educational practices also improve retention and graduation rates, two other aspects of the growth agenda for Wisconsin, ensure that there will be high-priority elements of the strategic plan. Based on those underlying principles, the strategic plan is structured around 4 C's: communication, community, capital, and campus. Rather than read any more of this, I'd just refer you to the materials that were offered in the agenda for this meeting, the pages 2 through 4, which show the communication, the 3 of the 4 of our C's: communication, connection, and capital support. And David Brookhart has been very diligent in identifying 20 specific goals that we want to accomplish and giving us progress updates and status for each of those goals at each of our Ready Committee meetings. And I want to applaud the committee and Dave and his assistants and the assistance we get from Cody Lowe. At this point, we are either on target or ahead of the plan for each of those 20 items. So, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If there are not, that's the end.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Capital Planning and Budget Committee goals. Regent Menedy.
Yes, sir. Well, we've had, now that Alex is on board, one meeting with our committee to start trying to focus in on goals and strategies to develop policies and assist in formulating strategies regarding those goals. The things that we talked about preliminarily, which we hope to develop in the future, would be to ensure that capital planning decisions align with each institution's mission, with their strategic enrollment, and the academic planning of the UW system. To fully engage in integrated planning as part of the capital program, and then the other thing we talked about was identifying ways to reduce burdensome processes and provide more flexibilities to the campuses. The other areas that we discussed were aligning capital budgets with institutional priorities, physical development, and program considerations. That's kind of the same as the policy considerations. Ensuring that facilities operate in an integral part of capital planning, to develop a systematic approach for the deferred maintenance program, which was an area that we discuss a lot. We have a lot of deferred maintenance on all of our campuses, many millions of dollars worth that we discuss at each meeting, and we want to get a better handle on that, and I think we're going to start getting that information and in the very near future from staff. It's a big job, but they're going to get us this information to help us see what we're dealing with in an overall picture. Also, we're going to try to identify new and innovative funding models, and we were talking about those have already occurred on some campuses, but there's also a need if that's going to be done for transparency, which is very important. And finally, we had a big discussion about exploring ways to repurpose buildings rather than just building new ones, and to ensure that the space that we have on campuses is used and optimized to its fullest. In other words, we don't want to have facilities sitting there not used for a significant part of the day just because they're designated for a certain use, to look into seeing whether or not those buildings can be used all the time and not just sit idle. So those are some of the things that we talked about. We're in preliminary discussions, and we'll probably define these so that they're more of a B&B or bat and ball kind of statement that we can make rather than these kind of generalized statements. But we're just starting, so we'll get there. Any questions?
Any questions, Bill? Thank you.
Thank you.
Business Finance Committee goals. Regent Whitburn.
Thank you, President Felbo. The committee has not met to formally work on goals yet, but we have circulated draft goals, and we have received feedback from all of the members of our committee. In putting our goals together, Regent Bailing and I have divided our prospective goals really into two buckets. The first being immediate focus items, which include the development of Regent policies required now by the legislature, namely the establishment of a carry-forward policy in which we had a broad discussion today, and also to develop the two policies that need to be developed before the end of the year related to tuition, GPR distribution to institutions, and also the policy of the utilization of tuition and GPR dollars throughout the fiscal year. So there's heavy lifting on both of those projects in front of us. President Falbo has directed the committee to also focus on the business of integrating our budgeting and financial planning and reporting together. And significant progress has been made on a number of these priorities. We also look forward to really a primary focus on a couple of other very important areas. The first is to help drive our efforts in the legislature and in the executive branches to accomplish the enactment of a statutory change providing the regents with the pay plan flexibility that initially was proposed by the governor in the recent budget. That remains a high priority. In the final goal, Regent Bailing and I have, and it appears the majority of our committee is comfortable with, is bringing in and facilitating an external examination of global efficiencies that we ought to be driving as we go about our oversight of operations across the campuses in the system. As was mentioned earlier, we heard Georgetown economist Tony Carnival, you recall, tell us that aside from the U.S. airline industry, our space in higher education is the most inefficient of any space in the American economy. So the question then is whether the University of Wisconsin is exempt from that characterization. And the committee look forward to that question, and we'll report back.
Any questions, comments? Would you go straight into audit, please?
As Regent Mueller and I work now to get the audit committee up and running as a freestanding entity, job one, of course, will be to work with Korn Ferry, President Riley, David Miller, and others in recruiting the chief audit executive. Meanwhile, we'll focus on the restructuring plan across the system with regard to the audit function recommended by the Baker-Tilly report that we received in July. We'll also be in the business of developing an appropriate 2-year audit plan that's designed to address critical audit, financial review, risk, and compliance issues. This, of course, will be a transitional period in the internal audit arena.
Any questions, comments? Thank you all for those updates, and I know there's much more to come. Our last area is governance and board operations, and I've asked Vice President Milner to take the lead on identifying priorities related to board governance.
Thank you, President Falvo. When President Falvo introduced the idea of a planning process, he not only asked the committee chairs to do the heavy lifting of working with their fellow regents to identify goals and priorities for each committee, he also asked me to look at overall board operations. During the last several weeks, I've worked closely with Mike and Jane to identify 4 areas that we plan to focus on during the next 2 years. Now, if some of these priorities sound familiar, it's because those priorities are intended to continue the good work that's been done that Regents Bradley, Pruitt, and others have put into motion over the last few years. So here's the list. Priority number 1, implement a Board of Regent assessment process to evaluate the board's effectiveness as a governing body. We plan to provide regents with the opportunity to evaluate themselves as a group using tools available from the Association of Governing Boards and others. Priority number 2 is to revisit the recommendations from the Regents Ad Hoc Committee on Board Roles and Responsibilities, an effort led by Regent Bradley to examine how the board best meets its key responsibilities. That committee made a number of recommendations, some of which have been adopted and some of which have not. Now that 18 months or so have passed since the work was begun, we have an ideal opportunity to revisit the work of that group. Priority number 3 is to continue the process of reviewing, revising, and updating the body of Regent policy documents, an effort that was initiated by Regent Pruitt several years ago. While this work has been a priority of the board's office, competing priorities have limited the staff's ability to make as much progress as they would have liked in that area. You'll recall that the board's policy documents are something of a mixed bag of policies that are still current and applicable, and policies that need updating or that may even need to be made obsolete. Our goal is to complete the review of at least 25 more policies during the next 2 years. And I see Regent Pruitt smiling.
Good luck. Godspeed.
Priority number 4 will include monitoring the priorities and goals identified by the standing committees. We plan to hold quarterly meetings of the Regents Executive Committee for that purpose. Finally, priority number 5 is to examine the effectiveness and operation of the Board of Regents office. As Executive Director Redue's request and recommendations, we will ask the Regents to provide feedback on board operations. In addition, at my request and recommendation, we'll evaluate the staffing of the office to ensure that the board is sufficiently staffed to meet its responsibilities. Thank you. Shortly after he was elected president of this board, Regent President Falvo said he thought we had some work to do and encouraged us to become more engaged and effective in supporting UW chancellors and institutions. It's my hope that these priorities will enable us to do just that. Thank you, and I welcome any thoughts from the Regents on any of these priorities, either today or in the immediate future.
Comments? Questions? Yes.
I think there's a lot of wonderful thought that's gone into all of this. The only thing I would request, just a minor request, would it be possible to get all of them, once they're all finalized, as a separate little document rather than us having to kind of rummage through all the different meetings and whatever?
It's the goal.
It would be just a little document that has them all from each one of the committees, a real kind of ready reference.
Yeah, that is the goal. And it's been done in the past, so we're anticipating that. Any other questions? Comments? And, you know, I hope... Oh. They're almost all gone. I was going to say, I hope we haven't been too intrusive on your campuses. But I think it's a great thing. A lot of our regents have been making a lot of visits to campuses. And I think you understand the intention is that we certainly want to help in every way we can, even though it is intrusive to your day-to-day operation. We will obviously discuss these more. Communications, petitions, and memorials. Are there any communications, petitions, or memorials? Okay. We will take a 10-minute recess. Board members can return to this room with their lunches, and the board will reconvene in open session to consider a resolution to recess into closed session. Thank you.
I